Welcome to DNA Valley. So I'm here today with CJ Overly. CJ is part of the BXP Life Sciences Division. BXP, you may remember, used to be called Boston Properties, and it's a nationally known commercial real estate developer that is actually increasing their footprint in the life sciences space, and especially right here in DNA Valley. So CJ, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really looking forward to hearing your thoughts about this area and learning more about BXP Life Sciences.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. I'm glad to be here.
You guys are big commercial real estate developers, and now you seem to be shifting over to help promote life sciences, not just to build in response to life sciences, but actually as sort of advocates within this area. That's how you and I met at one of the many networking events here in DNA Valley, where we're all just talking about, our vision, and we seem to have a lot in common in terms of what we think is happening here. But what caused that shift at BXP?
So, as you said, we've been around a long time, and we've been doing life science real estate for about 4 decades in the Boston, Cambridge market, and then more recently out on the West Coast, and of course very recently here in Rockville and DNA Valley. And, for me, it's not just about building the physical projects, but also investing in the ecosystem, right? And I think that's where you and I met, is my role on the Maryland Tech Council and the other work that I'm doing, because there's a recognition at BXP that the better the ecosystem overall does, the better we will do, right? And so we want to be a part of that dynamic ecosystem, and not simply just trying to lease space, but really contributing to the growth of the whole industry here.
Yeah, we say this all the time, a rising tide lifts all boats, right?
Exactly.
And I think you correctly call it an ecosystem, because we need everything. But what's driving this is a new disruptive technology that has promised to actually improve the entire pharmaceutical markets and bring amazing growth to that, and to birth a whole bunch of new companies that, of course, are going to need a place to do their development. And actually, one of the things that I see is that in biotech and in drug development, you actually need physical space. It isn't the kind of industry that will allow everybody to just go home. It's not a great place to have your biosafety cabinet and your PCR and cell counters and stuff like that at your house, and to collaborate over the internet. So this really is something where the commercial spaces can greatly enable the growth here in this area and everywhere around the country. So you've got a development right nearby. So you're already working on expanding your footprint in this area. It's called the Shady Grove Innovation District. I mean, that sounds huge. Tell us all about it.
So we spend a lot of time on positioning the project, right? And we spend a lot of time really researching innovation districts. We went up and down the East Coast, from Philadelphia and points north to North Carolina, and also met with folks virtually in other innovation districts across the country, in St. Louis and out on the West Coast, to really understand what the ingredients are that make up an innovation district, because we really felt like we had a unique opportunity. Our project is 31 acres, so it's a big site. We plan to completely redevelop the entire site with about 1.3 million square feet or so of lab space across 9 buildings, as well as some residential apartments to create that mix of uses. One of the things we learned from our work looking at innovation districts was that mixed use component and vibrancy is really important to creating that sense of place. And so we want to live up to that name, and that's going to involve not just developing a really great project, but as we were talking about earlier, being a part of the ecosystem and bringing elements of the ecosystem on site to create the network effect of having different folks from different firms and different places in the industry kind of colliding with one another in a intentional but unintentional, if you will, kind of manner. And so we're really looking forward to bringing this project online in the years to come, and to growing into that element as an innovation district.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So some of the key elements are about, what you just brought out, the mixed use, creating a destination, creating a focal point, and sort of a seamless integration of the many things that go into work and home life, right?
Right.
And 31 acres, and also next to King Farm, right? So you've already got tremendous amount of residential there. You have some decent shopping, decent
retail,
restaurants, really convenient to 270. So this is really great for people that commute up and down. Shady Grove is the end of the red line. Holy cow, what a great location to be at, right? So this makes total sense to me. What about the buildings themselves? So is there anything special that you're looking at for this particular development? Is biotech shifting in any way where, you guys have been able to tease out some of these elements? I think, you're right, like Philadelphia might be a good example of, what's needed, and, they've done a lot of, innovative stuff in this area. But so what are the things that, you might be able to bring to the project that will enhance companies that go ahead and commit to that project, their ability to develop drugs or to develop technologies that go into drugs or whatever?
Sure. Well, I want to touch on something you said, Jeff, which you mentioned the proximity to 270. We also are really looking forward to having a new bus rapid transit line that the county is putting in, coming Shady Grove Road, that will connect the metro station that you mentioned all the way out to the universities at Shady Grove, and there'll be a stop right at the Innovation District.
Yeah.
So just wanted to mention that because I think, especially with younger workers, I know my younger brother has never owned a car, no interest in owning a car, completely transit, dependent, and really enjoys that. So having multimodal transit options is, I think, one of the many aspects of what today's workforce is looking for. And then you were asking about, okay, once I get on site, right, what do I, what's available to me?
Right.
And so there we're planning, I think, several different things in phases. So in the first phase of the project, which will be the first lab building, about a 5-story building, about 150,000 square feet, and then that residential building that I mentioned, we'll be putting a fitness center inside the lab building, as well as access to new green space that we're creating outside, creating that indoor-outdoor environment. There's so much talk about wellness, right? And that's both physical wellness, having opportunity to get some exercise and get some fresh air, and that also contributes to our mental health, right, and our mental wellness. And so providing opportunities for that inside and outside the building is really important. Longer term, one of the things we saw when we looked at other innovation districts is that many had a centralized amenity offering. So a separate building, which we're tentatively calling the Nexus, that we would build at the center of the site that all of the different buildings would share. So a larger fitness center, cafe, we're talking about a podcast studio possibly going in there, other aspects that could be shared by all of the different tenants. And so by bringing people together, from getting them out of their buildings, the idea is that creates those collisions I mentioned earlier to hopefully foster some new ideas and new collaborations that might not otherwise have happened.
Yeah, so that's one of the reasons that I like to call this area DNA Valley, is because that aspect parallels Silicon Valley so much. Now, I don't think anybody was, I don't remember, I moved to Silicon Valley in the 80s, 81, I think I arrived there. I don't remember anybody sitting down and planning a good space for those industries. They sort of developed organically. But I think that everything you're talking about is how it evolved. Right? We had something called next bench syndrome that came from Hewlett-Packard's success. The idea that whatever problem you're dealing with in your technology or your development right now is probably being solved down the street or even at the next bench in your same company, right? And that these random collisions are critically important, and that a rising tide lifts all boats, right? That you're within a space where a huge amount of creativity is going on, and cross-fertilization benefits everybody, right? It's sort of counterintuitive in our industry even, right? Everything is intellectual property and secret, top secret, right? And if you look at Apple today, it's like, they have like a whole secret police probably, in case that makes sure that there's no leaks about what they plan to do next month or next year or what the new, this or that looks like, right? But it didn't used to be that way.
Right.
It used to be that, we hired people from other places who brought new ideas, or we did collaborations. We cross-licensed a lot of stuff, or even just used it with, sort of either permission or tacit permission.
Right.
Right? Because everybody was doing so well in the industry. And I definitely think that gene and cell therapy has that potential as well.
Yeah.
That, we're talking about a $20 trillion industry. That, there's never been a $20 trillion industry before, as far as I know. Right? But what's more important than healthcare?
Right.
So if we can unlock that type of value, will people buy it? I think they will. I think I'd rather, have 10 years of extra life than a Lamborghini. Right,
exactly.
Okay, so that's, I think that the value's there, so the growth is there. I think what you're envisioning in this, sort of innovation district is like a mini Silicon Valley, right? Where they are sharing restaurants, they are sharing podcast rooms, they are bumping into each other in the green space.
Yeah.
I think that's a really cool idea, and I think it's going to happen, sort of broadly across the entire
the region,
Rockville, Rockville to Frederick to Baltimore, I think just is sort of where I feel the electricity starting to build.
Yep.
So that's really fantastic. So, all right, so you definitely get it today. You're a huge company, so you've got tremendous potential to keep building if the demand is there. I think the demand is there. But what do you think are the long-term prospects, both here and really across the nation, for life sciences? Do you see any sort of arc in the development of life sciences that will impact the way space is built and allocated? Have you thought a little bit about how biotech is changing and how it's different in Frederick even than it is down here?
Sure. Yeah, there are different. There's certainly different types of space that firms need, right? Lab, air quotes, means a lot of different things, and for different types of science that's happening. And so, we have definitely given that thought, both for our project and as a company, to think about what might be needed. We've talked about getting more into GMP space and building our buildings to allow for some of that to happen and be co-located. One of the things we've conceptually planned for at the Innovation District is that 2 of those 9 buildings I mentioned have a larger first floor plate with a knockout slab so that you can get, a 28-foot clear height on that ground floor, so that if you had a user who wanted to have some small-scale manufacturing in the same building, or larger scale, in the same space as the rest of their operations, right? Typically, a lot of times, I think historically, you've seen those in disparate locations, and try to get that 45-minute drive between them if you can. But I think for some, the value of having it right downstairs could be tremendous. And then we talked earlier about the amenities. That we think that's really changing, as well as the ESG piece. I think one of the things we've seen in our other regions, I think we're starting to see here, is that the life science firms are recognizing the importance of environmentally sustainable buildings and want to locate their workforce in a building and on a site that has been constructed in a sustainable way. I think that's important, and we're starting to see a lot more of that.
Yeah, so that ties back to me saying wow about your brother, and I want to tell you, your brother, if he's out there watching this, I didn't mean it like, that's strange. No, I'm just impressed, right? Because I think younger people are actually, concerned about the right things, right? And I like that that's starting to permeate the business community. I'm a old guy, but I am very concerned about sustainability, and I do like the idea that a lot of people are foregoing the purchase of cars, and that we're starting to tip a little bit back to public transportation, and I think that will be a tremendous benefit for everybody.
Yeah.
So I'm really glad to hear that people are thinking in that way. So you're seeing that with other companies, but I think that it's hard to say, whether the chicken or the egg came first. But I think that in some way, people that are building companies are catching on to that it's attractive to the workforce
Right.
to have these sort of things that you're talking about. And I think that also goes back to the first thing that you said about a destination, right? I've heard that expression actually from Mark Elrich, who's our executive, our county executive. He's always talking about that life sciences could be at the nexus of a destination like a Pike and Rose, right? Where, you know, people would stay after work and go have a drink together, or, you know, go to a movie, or, you know, and live nearby and things like that. And I think that's, to me, that's, you know, my commute to work is like somewhere between 6 and 8 minutes, depending on the lights. Like, if I could live at the company, right, and get all the benefits of, you know, the community that I do live in and all those conveniences, I mean, that would just be optimum. I know it sounds crazy, but, you know.
No, I think it's really important. You know, that's one of the reasons we included the residential component, right? Because, you know, someone could live in the residential building, walk across the, you know, 3-4 minutes to the lab building, cross the street to the Mom's Organic Market to pick up some groceries on the way home, and
then make a healthy meal with food that they picked up that day.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Exactly.
You know, that wasn't stuff
really
that's been sitting in the fridge for a week.
Right.
Yeah, no, I can see all this stuff. You know, I can imagine it. I think there's, you know, I think it's great to hear it's evolving that way. It's, you know, it's hard to predict how long it'll be before it becomes the norm, or if it will even get there where it's the norm. But I really like what I'm hearing, and I see why it's desirable, and why people are, why the dogs are eating the dog food, so to speak.
Yeah.
So you're developing in that model, and 31 acres right here in the Rockville area, which to me is the epicenter of this, you know, sort of breakout growth. Now, when I was out looking for additional space, people are always, you know, selling me on, it's perfectly divided 50-50 between lab and office, and I was like, well, we don't really need that much lab. Right. What are you finding? Like, what's a typical ratio out there now for the customers you're working with, and how do you remain flexible in order to accommodate? So that's it, huh? I mean, the 28 feet gives you the option of big bioreactors, but it doesn't necessitate them.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, flexibility is really the key there. You know, I smiled when you brought up 50-50, because I've had a lot of conversations. Is it 50-50? Is it 60-40? Is it 70-30? And the answer is it's all of the above, because it depends on what the firm needs. You know, it's what our client needs. So we're designing our base building systems toward that 50-50. But what's important is thinking about that flexibility. So what that means is the lab space can go anywhere on the floor plate. You're not restricted to, well, that has to go in this corner of the building because that's how we've designed the infrastructure. So that's one measure of flexibility. Have we allocated enough additional roof space so that if you need to go to 70% lab and bring in some supplemental equipment, we've thought of that, right? We've got shafts already, you know, designed to accommodate that additional capacity. So building that in thoughtfully and really thinking about you know, how you're going to accommodate a variety of different groups in the building, I think is really important. And so we spend time as we're, you know, going through this design process for each building. You know, I really try to put on this hat of, what is the client going to want? How are they going to look at this? And we even partner with some consultants who really I've brought in just to bring that tenant perspective, because we're designing this building without a client in tow yet. But when the time comes, we want to make sure that it's seamless for them, and that we've really been thoughtful.
Yeah, I mean, that flexibility, you can't beat it, right? You know, the point is that at move-in, you have flexibility. In terms of growth, you have flexibility. And then you also have evolutionary flexibility. So as your needs change, okay, you could go ahead and remodel as opposed to having to move, right? That must be a very difficult thing to build into the overall design, but if you can do that, I can see why that would be really attractive. When are you going to actually break ground on this thing? When does the first building come down? Because there's buildings all over that, and I heard originally you were thinking, oh, you'd use some of the buildings while you rebuilt other ones, but now I heard you're going to you're going to scrape the whole area, right? Yeah. First of all, when does it get scraped? Is it happening already?
Not quite yet, but we're laying the groundwork. And by the end of this year, we'll start taking buildings down. Wow. And then sometime no later than the middle of next year, I hope, we'll start going the other way and bring in buildings.
Oh, that's pretty
vertical.
quick.
So we're currently working with the City of Rockville through their process to make sure we get approvals for all the different aspects of what we need. And then it'll just be a matter of how this market evolves and what's the right timing to actually get started.
Are you in Rockville town, or are you in the unincorporated
We're in the city
space? You're in the city limits?
Yeah, the incorporated city limits, yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, actually, you can't lose, quite frankly. I think Rockville's a great place, and the county's a great place, too. So, and they're pretty flexible, too. They are willing to sit down and listen to, what's the end game, and to figure out how they can help you to it. At least that's, been my experience. All right, so what about the COVID impact on all of this? So COVID, maybe it's gone, or maybe we've got a temporary respite between the last COVID and the next whatever, sort of zoonotic virus that works into the humans, the human environment. But this has really changed things, hasn't it?
It has.
I guess my personal experience is it doesn't change the needs of biotech, right? And we've had to work very hard to keep our people here and to make sure that we can maintain that creative space where everybody can see each other. That actually involved, innovations and environmental changes within our company, including putting in COVID testing for everybody, like, same-day PCR testing, so that we could keep our people protected and they can feel confident coming into work or bringing their kids into work even.
Yeah.
Is this, impacting at all your plans going forward? Is that like part of the things that you study? Is what do we do in the next, epidemic or sort of crisis situation?
It has had a tremendous impact on a variety of levels. So, before the pandemic, our leases and our contracts didn't contemplate that kind of a disruption, right? And so now we're starting to think ahead as we work with clients. How do we make sure they're protected? How do we make sure we're protected? How do we make sure that we can collaborate within that framework if something should happen again, right? Where like the pandemic. In the short term, and I hope it continues to be headed toward short term, there was a lot of talk about supply chain disruptions, right, during the pandemic, and we're still feeling that. Yeah. Getting large mechanical equipment, you're looking at a year plus for equipment that used to take, a handful of months. And so 2 to 3 times that wait really impacts when we can start. So, you asked earlier about starting construction, and that just depends on so many factors, and including when can we get the equipment on site in the right sequence to do the work. And so the pandemic had a huge part in that. And then I think for our region, the pandemic put a big, huge spotlight on this region, right? And all the great work that firms here are doing to help us get through that and ultimately get to where we are now. And so I think the pandemic is one reason among many why we find ourselves invested here in the life science and not just in the other clusters where we were operating previously.
Yeah. This industry should be a little bit more resilient to those ups and downs. I know we had to be. We didn't really have any choice. But also, we're working in viruses, and we sort of understand it. It doesn't have the same level of the unknown as it does for the general public. I did notice that was a factor in the way that we thought about and accommodated and, sort of evolved into the new reality of the COVID. But it is nice that it's officially declared over by the WHO and U.S. government. I hope, the COVID is listening.
Exactly. Agreed.
It's
Agreed.
Really, but the thing you were saying about supply chain, and this goes back to my background in economics, right, is, people underappreciate the inflationary impact of the supply chain issues, and they tend to blame monetary policy.
100%.
Yeah, and also the fixes are monetary policy, right? Inflation, of course, we're having some issues with supply chains that are as devastating as, did you know there's 300, I just read this the other day, 300 chemotherapy drugs that are in short supply and difficult to get now. People are going to their oncologists and they're saying, I'm sorry, but we can't get the drug you need. You wouldn't imagine that in the United States.
No, right? That's just not a problem you'd think you'd have.
Yeah, you
here.
wouldn't, right. But you see, that is the fact that it is a global market, and that COVID had a huge impact on that. And then a lot of trade policy, like, things like tariffs or whatever, they're impacting our ability to do business and our ability to grow.
Absolutely.
And maybe, some of the attention is mismatched, right? Like, we're coming up to the debt ceiling. This would be the number one way to throw us into, absolute chaos, is just to not pay our debt. That's even a question.
Right.
Like, we can afford to pay our debt, but we won't do it because we want some concessions in the future. Right. We need to settle the budget before we can agree to pay our existing bills.
Yeah.
Now, that would be devastating, right?
Very much so.
Right.
Absolutely.
And there's not anything anti-inflationary in any of the list of things that they're even negotiating on right now.
Absolutely.
So pay our bills, and let's learn to live with a little bit of inflation, because I'm just thinking, you guys are going to be a bit squeezed, right? Because you have the expenses of building these things out, and then you have companies are going to have to pay an increased price. Now, fortunately, the price of biotech space has been on a constant upward trend. I think that it's reasonable to believe that the long-term trend is absolutely sustainable. And what's the logical conclusion of this? Of course, if this turns into DNA Valley, then you can expect the rents to be similar to Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think we're gradually headed that direction. I think this market is still, on a relative basis to some other markets, including ones in which we operate, a relative value. But I do think you're seeing that gentle upward kind of pressure, and the supply chain and the inflationary pressures you mentioned absolutely contribute to that.
Yeah, it seems like it's going to cut into your margins a little bit. It would have been, the situation would be better for commercial real estate developers if there weren't supply chain issues, and if you didn't have to anticipate, sort of length in time for projects and increased budgets for projects, right?
Yeah.
While also being able to capitalize on this trend, in biotech, because Boston's right in the name of your, the original company name now, BXP.
Yep.
But so Cambridge, right? I bet you build some stuff in Cambridge. How much value can be created per square foot, right, of biotech space.
Absolutely.
So there's almost no limit to this, right?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, this industry should be able to grow even in those somewhat inflationary conditions, but it is going to mean a little bit of a squeeze on everybody, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think you said it well. We are definitely feeling squeezed at the moment, but I think we have a tremendous conviction in the long-term outlook for the industry, right? The fundamentals there, the various platform technologies that have and continue to come out suggest that there's going to be a lot more innovation ahead, and the demographics, right, really necessitate that we continue to invest in life science, because you mentioned earlier just having a higher quality and a longer life is the goal. And I think there are a lot of great things in the proverbial pipeline to bring us that, more of that. Yeah,
I think to me, it's clear working within the industry. I mean, we have a cure for HIV that has just, completed a phase 1 and an analytic treatment interruption The data's fabulous. We think it meets all of the criteria. So we're kind of informally calling it a successful phase 1.
Yeah, that's great.
Until the FDA should bless that at some point, hopefully. But that's huge, right? A cure for HIV.
It's tremendous.
That'd be the biggest thing since polio.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
But it's the tip of the iceberg in terms of gene and cell therapy.
Yeah.
Right? Because you have from other companies cures for a bunch of monogenic diseases, and then within the CAR T space you have cures for cancers. And I think that the cures for cancers are really just at the absolute beginning of what's possible in gene and cell therapy. We actually have a part of our platform that I believe will eventually lead to sending radiation and chemotherapy the way of bloodletting and leeches.
Wow.
Okay, now what kind of value does that unlock?
Yeah, tremendous.
And you're developing 1.3 million square feet, but we anticipate that we'll need 1 million square feet within the next 10 years.
Wow.
Just this one company, and that companies that collaborate with us will need another 1 to 2 million square feet. I don't know whether 3 million a lot in this market?
In our market here currently, that would be a significant amount of growth. I think it's certainly growth we can accommodate as a region. So, and that's really the key. Part of what has held the throttle back, I think, on our region at times has been a lack of space. And so, we're because if you can't get the space, it takes time, as we've been discussing, for that space to come online. Your growth is constrained, or you'll go somewhere else where you can get the space. And so it's incumbent upon us as developers of this space to keep our finger on the pulse and to try to stay ahead of that growth curve that you're referencing. And I think we're doing a much better job now than, say, 3 to 5 years ago, pre-pandemic, we were doing.
Yeah, I think, look, this is a typical sort of sine wave anyway. Like, what happens is that demand and supply never really match, and demand is ahead of supply, and supply overbuilds, and so I guess as a developer you really understand how to navigate those just normal cycles. Then you go ahead and get a curveball like COVID, right? And I think this is true about all businesses, by the way. I mean, that flexibility that you talked about, and also that really thoughtful strategic planning that is planning for the exception as opposed to designing for today. Right. Trying to skate to where the puck's going.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah, that's always really tricky to do. But it's really interesting. So, a big company like yours probably has the resources to really do a thoughtful study of those things, and to be able to build a 1.3 million square foot project like right down the road from us. That's a substantial add to the biotech space in this area, which I'm quite sure at some point will be oversubscribed, right? Yeah. But, that's really great that you guys are, targeting this area for that. And I think that makes total sense to do. Do you see little pockets within the biotech space that, are particularly interesting to BXP or to you personally, or that, that you would like to highlight as being, sort of interesting trends or innovations within this community? I mean, you get around. What do you see?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned earlier our county executive, Mark Elrich, and he has talked a lot about North Bethesda, what he wants to achieve there, and he recently announced the Institute for Health Computing with partnership with the University of Maryland system. I really think for our region, that intersection between quantum and advanced computing, AI, ML, with biotech and life science, we're one of the few regions globally that is top 10 in both of those categories. And I think if we harness that, right, and we bring those different firms together to collaborate and to do some of the word you taught me last time we spoke about cooperation, bringing a little bit of that to bear too, I think that will be tremendous. I'm most excited about the intersection of where those things can happen and how it can expedite our discovery capabilities on the life science side.
Yeah, that is a really spot-on long-term vision, that there's a merge going on between computation, big data, AI, quantum computing, and biology, right? The incredible complexity of the human body
Right.
means that it's a really fruitful place to apply that, right? And that's amazing. Yeah, you've sort of picked out this area as being a place where there is a confluence of those two factors and many other factors as well. You know, there are so many good things about DNA Valley that bode well for growing in both those spaces and growing them together and growing the things around it. Like one of the things that I think is really amazing about this area that's different from your backyard in Cambridge or a lot of the development you do on the West Coast is that we have space, right? It always blows my mind the level of industry in this area and yet the lack of crowding, right? And of course we complain about the traffic around here.
That's the trade-off a little bit.
Yeah, but okay, compare that to, 101 between San Francisco and San Jose during rush hour.
Sure.
Okay. You ain't. I just want to tell you, Maryland folks, you ain't seen traffic. You have no idea. This is like I will get out in rush hour and sometimes I'm like, I can't believe this is rush hour. Yeah. Right. Neither side of the highway's moving on 101 at 5 o'clock.
Absolutely.
At least there's a reverse commute here still.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Like if you're going the opposite to traffic, it is really like a breeze.
Yeah.
But we still need to anticipate that as well, right? I mean, I hope that the county is on that and the state is on that and the federal government is on that. This growth will mean that, we're going to have to do better in public transportation, and we're going to have to do better in just infrastructure in general to support this growth. But if we do, the results are there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think you're really in a cool space. Yeah. Getting to watch all this stuff and I don't know whether to feel sorry for you or be jealous of the fact that you don't have to do it. I mean, sometimes I'm like, biotech is like playing 3D chess on six boards at once.
Right.
And I go, it would be cool to be doing something, that was just one aspect of it instead of all of it.
Sure, absolutely.
Right? But on the other hand, there is a lot of gratification being any part of this ecosystem. Absolutely. And so almost no matter where you land in it, there's opportunity, challenges, just a tremendous growth that will really, sort of drive all of, our collective reward. Yeah. So on that note, let me just ask you one last question here. From your perspective, what sort of lessons have you learned? What sort of advice would you give to people that are listening to this podcast about the future of DNA Valley, or they're thinking about biotech, that are thinking about real estate, that are thinking about just growing anything in this area? You have any wisdom you can drop on us?
Well, I don't know about wisdom, but I think that the most important thing that I have found, whether we're talking about building a career or building a company or building a project, is you first got to build relationships. That to me is fundamental, and it might sound a little trite because but oftentimes things that do are that way because they're actually are really important. And whether it's the mentors that I've had personally that have helped me through my career and through decisions that I've made, whether it's building relationships with the city of Rockville and the great staff there to help move the project forward, building relationships with clients and talking to them about what their growth needs are and how can we anticipate with them what that growth is going to look like so that they don't have to uproot their company. So relationships, I think, Jeff, are really kind of the fundamental baseline for me across all of those different areas that you mentioned.
Spoken like a real salesperson. Nah, I'm just kidding. No, I think that's absolutely right. And you did bring out, sort of the depth of these relationships, because they could just be somebody that takes an interest in you personally, who gives you some good advice, and that's that mentoring thing, which a lot of people don't appreciate the value of that.
Absolutely.
In developing a career and in finding stuff that you love to do that also, sustains your life. Right?
Absolutely.
And then, of course, that communication, that building relationships between everybody in the community. That's what reveals those, potential jewels that can be polished up and turned into collective value that, builds sort of the productivity and the output that is what we all divide up in this area, right? And you don't know who that's going to be. It's the
Absolutely.
It's the people that are doing every aspect of the business, from the CEO down to the janitor in your company, and
Absolutely.
then the person who owns a small business across the street and a restaurant over there and whatever. And yeah, it is all about those relationships. And I'm so glad you brought up the idea of cooperation.
Yeah.
That's so funny. We talked about that at the MTC networking event. That right now we're in this wonderful moment within DNA Valley where we don't have to be too parochial about stuff, and we don't have to be too focused on just our own lane.
Yeah.
That we can be gregarious, we can collaborate with people in a fluid manner, and even though we may sometimes be collaborating with our potential competitors,
Right.
it doesn't matter because everything is going up.
Yeah.
And there'll be a time for the the competition part of that. Right now, the cooperation is really paying off for everybody. So I love that advice. Relationships. They're big, they're important, they result in a good DNA Valley podcast. So thank you for coming by today.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, our pleasure, and I hope we'll talk to you again soon.
Look forward to it. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.